Good morning, and welcome to the Patriot League's second annual Pillar Project event. My name is Dr. Henry L. Armington, Sr. of Shreveport, Louisiana, and I've flown in for this event today. I'll be serving as your MC this morning. Religious leaders have gathered here today to call on their governing officials to defend principles of importance to them. The principles of traditional marriage, parental rights, religious liberty, and the humanity of the unborn. From the viewpoint of these leaders, are pillars of support indispensable for the welfare of society, moral truths predating government itself. Although these Pillar Project participants do not share a unity of faith, or even agree as to who's going to heaven or who's not, as the heads of their respective assemblies, they stand in solidarity for the defense of the pillars. They are Catholic, Evangelical, Greek Eastern Orthodox, Mormon, and Muslim leaders. In total, participants actively lead over 131,000 Colorado citizens from 45 Colorado cities and towns. These leaders are African Americans, Arabic, Brazilian, Hispanic, Irish, Italian, Jewish, Native Americans, Polish, Vietnamese, among others, and have committed to stand together to call on their governing officials to defend the Pillar principles, both those who are present and those unable to be in attendance this morning due to extenuating circumstances. At this time, we'd like to recognize the following members of the Colorado legislature who are with us today, each of whom has been rated by the Patriot League as a defender of the Pillar principles. Legislators, as I read your names, please stand so that we can recognize you and remain standing until all legislators have been recognized. Representative Stephen Humphrey. Senator John Cook. Assistant Minority Leader Representative Polly Lawrence. Representative Kevin Van Winkle. Representative Tim Leonard. Representative Patrick Neville. Senator Chris Hulbert. Senator Laura Woods. Representative Joanne Windholz. Assistant Majority Leader Kevin Lundberg. Senator Tim Neville. And Representative Kim Ransom. Thank you, and please be seated. In addition to the latest legislators present this morning, we'd like to pass along regards from the following legislators who were prevented from being with us and have asked to send their regards to you this morning. Representative J. Paul Brown, Representative Perry Buck, Senator Larry Crowder, Senator Orrin Hill, Senator Kent Lambert, Representative Paul Lundeen, Senate Majority Caucus Chair Vicki Marble, Senate Majority Leader Mark Shuffle, Representative Lang Sias, Senator Jerry Sonnenberg, Representative Eulin Willett, Representative James Wilson, and Representative Cole Wist. We express our appreciation to each of these legislators for being pillar defenders, fighting hard for these principles here at the State House. With those introductions and greetings out of the way, I'd like to invite the Patriot League president and founder, my good friend and brother, Aaron Robertson, to the podium to get us started with some remarks about the pillar of traditional marriage. Aaron?
Good morning, and thank you for being here today. Before we hear from our legislative speakers, I wanted to take just a few minutes and share some thoughts with you about the pillar of traditional marriage in particular, especially in light of last year's United States Supreme Court ruling on marriage. Someone might say, hey, Aaron, the court ruled that marriage includes same-gender unions, and that settles the debate. Nothing can be done at this point. What part of Supreme don't you understand? So I'd like to engage that sentiment this morning by pointing out what I believe to be 6 critically important facts that we as Americans must understand to have proper perspective on this issue. Fact number 1 is this. Let's remember that as of October 5th, 2014, less than 2 years ago, all but 19 states in our federal union had active laws and or constitutional amendments on the books defining marriage traditionally. Prior to the Supreme Court's ruling last summer, numerous federal appeals courts overturned the will of the people in these states, so that by the time the Supreme Court made its ruling last year, it could be said that 38 states had already legalized same-gender marriage. This legalization was through judicial activism. It was not by the will of the people. Fact number 2, there was an extensive federal study published in 2010 designed to appraise the research of the previous decade concerning the impact of marriage on children, which indicated that the welfare of children is best supported by their biological, traditionally married mom and dad. Yes, a federal study demonstrated the fact that traditional marriage is best for children only 6 years ago. Fact number 3, as of March 2009, roughly 7 years ago, no state in the union had passed a statute to allow same-gender marriage except via the mechanism of judicial mandates working through various state legislatures. Fact number 4, no nation on the planet recognized marriage as anything other than the union of a man and a woman until the year 2001, just over 15 years ago. Fact number 5, excluding our country, only 8.4% of the world's population lives in a nation where same-gender marriage is in effect and legally recognized. The issue is far from settled even from this perspective. As of this year, only 20 countries besides America, out of 195 U.S. recognized countries in the world, have same-gender marriage, and citizens from around the world are rising up to defend marriage with huge rallies in France and Mexico, some attracting hundreds of thousands of people. Fact number 6, 159 years ago, the United States Supreme Court agreed to define citizenship, to exclude those of African heritage by a 7-2 majority. The court's ruling concerning African Americans was overturned just 11 years after it was announced via an amendment to the United States Constitution. In 2015, the court agreed to define marriage for 324 million Americans, to include same-gender unions by a 5-4 majority. So I'd like to share a few observations about these facts. It seems to me that sitting on a certain court doesn't make persons infallible. Sometimes mistakes have to be corrected. If Americans reversed one egregious decision via a constitutional amendment, why should we think it beyond the pale to do it again? 1857's ruling had its 1868 correction. When will 2015's correction happen? And more importantly, are you and I willing to go to work to make it happen? Let me encourage you to actively reject the idea that the authority and self-determination of we the people has been replaced by a branch of the federal government. Our United States Constitution has reserved all powers not specifically granted to the federal government, to the states and the people, respectively. We do have the constitutional and God-given right to govern ourselves on the question of what marriage is, and I want to strongly encourage you to support the goal of we the people reclaiming our rightful authority to govern ourselves on the question of marriage, and to ask you to never stop defending the truth about marriage being the union of one man and one woman. Friends, if marriage really is the union of a man and a woman and predates government itself, then same-gender marriage is a lie. It is not hate to speak this truth. Our religious leaders can love people and still believe they are wrong about same-gender marriage. No one can rightly characterize these leaders as haters, leaders who've demonstrated love to those with whom they disagree, love that's partly expressed by standing faithfully on the teachings of their religion. In the end, we cannot base our society on a lie. Do we want our grandchildren to wake up in America to see the day when the pillar of traditional marriage crumbles to the ground because we stop fighting to defend it? To see it turned into a union of any gender and number of consenting individuals, which then makes the institution meaningless because it means everything and introduces things like thruples, polyamory, and co-parenting. For those of us thinking to ourselves that the fallout from the lie about marriage hasn't quite hit our communities yet, so there's no emergency, remember that the weeds in your neighbor's yard without some type of action will soon be the weeds in your yard. Friends, if we care about the society that our children will grow up in, then we should care that a lie is being spread in our culture about what marriage actually is. And at the end of the day, you have to ask yourself if you're okay with that. Do your convictions, do your beliefs allow that kind of passiveness when it comes to the truth? We the people must incessantly advocate for the truth about marriage and ask officials at every level of government to defend and articulate the truth about marriage, something we're all doing here this morning. Most of all, we must advocate for the truth in the most powerful and undeniable of ways in our own lives. As imperfect as they may be, we must honor our own marriages and seek to support the marriage relationship of every man and woman whose marriage we come in contact with. It is for this reason we speak against both homosexual and heterosexual behaviors that undermine the institution of marriage. Ryan T. Anderson has rightly said, government doesn't create marriage, government recognizes marriage. Government rightly recognizes marriage and must be in the marriage business because government has a legitimate and enduring interest in the well-being of children, with social science demonstrating that to the degree marriages fail in society, children suffer. They do worse in school, their health suffers, they engage in more dangerous behaviors, and so on. Social science has demonstrated that to the degree marriage fails in society, the number of citizens who depend on the government for their sustenance increases proportionally. For those libertarian-minded folks out there, remember that a free citizenry cannot long survive if the majority of its citizens depend on the government rather than the strength that comes from healthy and strong marriages and the families they produce. For those who consider themselves to be limited government aficionados, we must understand that to the degree the institution of marriage fails, limited government becomes increasingly impossible. Let's remember that America's founding principles were fundamentally a recognition that morality exists. In other words, right and wrong exist, and that our public policy should reflect a national identity that is moral and right, not immoral and wrong. These principles are fundamentally moral questions that have a certain reality about them, and regardless of whether a citizen happens to be secular or religious, I hope that one day we'll all see the value that these principles bring to our society. Some might ask, why should we insist that our government writes its misguided course on marriage? Why not accept what seems to be an irreversible national course? Why not throw in the proverbial towel? I say the answer is simple. It is immoral for the government to tell children that either their mom or dad doesn't matter, that they're dispensable and replaceable and interchangeable. And this is what same-gender marriage implies in all cases and actualizes in many cases. It is immoral to allow an individual who is born with clearly identifiable male features into a woman's restroom or shower where our wives, daughters, and mothers are vulnerable. Thank you. just because that man regrettably suffers from gender dysphoria. And both of these examples are directly related to the logic that same-gender marriage itself relies upon. The state has a rational interest in reserving the recognition of marriage into something more than a relationship between adults of any gender or number. And this interest presupposes the immutable nature of an individual's plainly recognizable gender at birth. Can we as Americans, especially those who claim to have God on their side, give up on what we know is true and right just because there is a devoted, talented, and well-funded opposition? We must never be afraid to be in the perceived minority. As the ancient psalmist David said, "I will not be afraid of many thousands of people who have set themselves against me all around." We must refuse to be the American generation that gave up on what marriage truly is. As the facts I mentioned beforehand demonstrate, the fight is young, the struggle is real, and victory is possible. I pointed out the 6 facts for some needed perspective, but there yet remains a question for each of us. Are we willing to work as long as it takes to preserve and successfully defend this pillar of moral truth in our society, like the Americans of the Dred Scott era did, for the truth that all men are created equal, regardless of their ethnicity? Our zeal for authentic marriage must exceed the zeal possessed by those purveying counterfeit marriage. We're all being told to give up on marriage and basically go home. Our forebears never tolerated this type of defeatism, and neither should we. After the egregious 1859 U.S. Supreme Court decision, a newspaper article denouncing the decision captured the essence of the determination of those who ultimately overturned this immoral decision. Gird up yourselves for the struggle ahead. In this moral struggle, we seek to inspire our fellow citizens towards the truth about the most fundamental of human institutions, marriage. And we wish to maintain a society committed to religious liberty, with the free exchange of ideas, including for those who disagree with us. And we hope that through this constitutionally protected process, our fellow citizens will see the validity of what we stand for. As the old adage goes, where there is a will, there is a way. Our responsibility is to commit to the principle of traditional marriage and choose to defend it, so that the truth about marriage will ultimately prevail in America. We have to stand together as fellow citizens in spite of our many differences. If you and I were standing next to one another and saw someone drowning in the South Platte River that winds through Denver, we wouldn't refuse to work together to save a drowning person because we didn't share the same religious beliefs or ethnicity. Well, folks, our state and nation is currently in the act of drowning. And for too long, we've refused to work together for the defense of these principles. As a result, our state and nation are drowning in moral confusion. As I close, it is worth repeating and remembering. I will not be afraid of many thousands of people who have set themselves against me all around. We must refuse to be the American generation that gave up on what marriage is. The fight is young, the struggle is real, and victory is possible. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Aaron. I'd like to take just a quick minute, sort of an MC privilege, to comment on the essential nature of ethnic unity for the successful defense of the pillars. You know, these pillars are not unique to any one ethnicity, and no one group can claim ownership of them because they are collectively true of all of us gathered today. And being true for all of us, if these pillars are destroyed, we will all suffer together. The reality is that we have spent too many years failing to show our governing officials that the pillar principles are cared about deeply by a broad coalition of citizens. These are not concerns just for a handful of ethnic groups. Just as we've heard, these principles are of great importance to a broad coalition of religious groups. Let's work together, my friend, for these 4 principles that are affecting our shared communities. Principles we all agree on, and we can pick up our disagreements on other critical matters in other appropriate contexts. With that, I'd like to invite our first legislative speaker to the podium, Assistant Majority Leader, State Senate Kevin Lundberg, who will be responsible to the calling of the religious leaders to defend the pillar of parental rights. Senator Lundberg.
Thank you very much. I appreciate this brief opportunity to speak on the issue of parental rights, and indeed all of the rights that these principles of good government are for. But first, let me simply thank all of the religious leaders that have gathered here today, and indeed those who couldn't make it but are still committed to these values. They are essential for freedom, because freedom doesn't stand on its own. It requires virtue and it requires faith. Those are fundamental underpinnings to what our culture is about. And these pillars that have been identified that all of us here have are in agreement with are essential, absolutely essential for what we're doing in this great experiment called the United States of America and the freedoms that we enjoy. Parental rights is an issue that I have dug into deeply over the years. Indeed, before I was a legislator, I was very active with an organization called Christian Home Educators of Colorado. And we take the responsibility that we as parents have for the raising of our kids very seriously. And as a legislator, I have seen firsthand how not everyone agrees on that principle. There are those who believe the state should have the priority and should have the authority to make the decisions on how children are raised. And I don't see that God has established that. Indeed, there are several areas of jurisdiction that God established. One is civil government. But the government of the family actually precedes historically that of civil government. And indeed, in terms of the day-to-day realities of life, so too that precedes the authority and the responsibility of civil government when it comes to parents directing the lives and the upbringing of their children. All of these are so carefully intertwined that it's hard to really separate the principle of parental rights from that of the understanding of what marriage is and the family, and then the very recognition of the value of life itself. All of those tie back into where we get our values from. And I'd like to leave you with this one thought here. Aaron, you said, you began your presentation with, what about the word supreme do you not understand? Well, let me remind us all of what the people of Colorado consider of that word supreme. The preamble to the Colorado Constitution begins this way: "We, the people of Colorado, with profound reverence for the supreme ruler of the universe, in order to form a more independent and perfect government, establish justice, ensure tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, And then the Constitution continues with all of the particulars. But it begins with that reverence for the supreme ruler of the universe, and I don't think they have that's comprised of 9 people in black robes. Indeed, there's a place for the Supreme Court for the state of Colorado and for the United States. But it's not to redefine the principles that God established initially. Not of marriage, not of the family, not of the authority of parents to direct the upbringing of their children. And it's for that reason that I find it a real privilege to stand here today and defend those values again and stand with all of you who have said, yes, that is fundamental to our life and to our understanding of reality. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you, Senator Lundberg. At this time, I'd like to invite our next speaker to the podium, State Senator Tim Neville. Senator Neville will be responsible to the call of the religious leaders to defend the pillar of religious liberty. Senator Neville.
Good morning. Friends, I'm honored to address the religious leaders and elected officials and guests gathered this morning. Your efforts to protect and promote individual liberty, marriage, strong families, parental rights, protecting the unborn, and the humanity and dignity of every man, woman, and child is the most important work any of us can ever do. And none of these principles can be protected and championed unless we commit wholeheartedly to an unwavering defense of every American's right to religious liberty and freedom of conscience. After all, America was settled by people of faith who left their old countries, where they were often persecuted for their religious beliefs. They risked their lives, their families' lives. They put aside their fear of the unknown so they could freely practice their faith and lead their lives, giving glory to God. Can you imagine the strength of their faith in God to embark on such a trip? Surviving a dangerous sea voyage, to face an unknown and possibly hostile land? These early colonists had to be people of tremendous, tremendous faith. So it's no surprise that our founders put religious freedom on the top of the list of unalienable rights enumerated in the Bill of Rights. And why did our founders mention it first? James Madison gives us a clue when he said, "The religion, then, of every man must be left to the conviction and conscience of every man. And it is the right of every man to exercise it as they may dictate. This right is in its nature an unalienable right from God." And Madison, like many of our founders, he had a political reason to agree to adopt the Bill of Rights and the First Amendment protecting religious liberty. And we owe a tremendous debt of gratitude to our Baptist brethren for making that possible. You see, they represented a majority in the Virginia and New York delegations to the Constitutional Convention, and they lobbied for the adoption of the Bill of Rights as a precondition for approving the new Constitution. Now, Thomas Jefferson famously wrote in a letter to the committee of the Danbury Baptist Association, "Believing with you that religion is a matter which lies solely between man and his God, that he owes account to none other for his faith or his worship, that the legislative powers of government reach actions only and not opinions, I contemplate with sovereign reverence that act of the whole American people which declared that their legislature should make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof." thus building a wall of separation between church and state. Now, a wall of separation. The wall of separation was to protect the free exercise of religion from the interference of government. Well, friends, that wall has been under tremendous attack by political interests who promote their narrow version of the common good at the expense of our inalienable God-given rights to religious liberty. Now, our founders, who understood natural law and the need for a Constitution and Bill of Rights, would oppose any kind of trade-off. Unfortunately, too many modern-day politicians and political activists embrace, and Father, I'm going to come to you for confession because I'm stealing this from you, Father Kimberling, but they embrace utilitarianism over individual rights. Now, I looked up the definition after listening to Father Kimberling speak about utilitarianism and the threat. I looked it up in the dictionary, and it says, utilitarianism, the doctrine that actions are right if they are useful or for the benefit of a majority, or the doctrine that an action is right insofar as it promotes happiness, and that the greatest happiness of the greatest number should be the guiding principle of conduct. How far have we fallen from what our founders did? And we've seen utilitarian philosophies manifested in various political isms in our history. Socialism, Marxism, communism, fascism, and other forms of statism. Government force and coercion become the necessary tools to provide this greatest happiness to the greatest number of people. Inalienable rights, like religious liberty and protecting the dignity of the individual, are sacrificed, seen as impediments to achieving goals, quote, for the greater good, unquote. In 2012, my first year in the Colorado Senate, I discovered firsthand how quickly religious liberty could be sacrificed to further these utilitarian goals. A bill was introduced to require Colorado hospitals to post a list of every procedure they did not provide based on grounds of religious or moral grounds. It was a clear attack on religious liberty, particularly burdening Catholic and Seventh-day Adventist hospitals who would not permit in certain procedures. I was dumbfounded. Is this America? How could my fellow legislators in the Colorado Senate attempt to mandate such a thing? I'll never forget that sinking feeling of watching that bill pass through the Colorado Senate. Later that year, I sponsored a Senate memorial supporting a religious liberty exemption to the Affordable Care Act and the HHS mandate concerning birth control and abortifacients. I reasoned, after all, what freedom-loving American would want to force another to purchase a product which directly violates their religious faith? Well, friends, my answer came soon enough. They all came out. Opponents even flew in activist Sandra Fluck, if you recall her name, into town to drum up opposition to our right of religious conscience memorial. In the end, we were on a losing side of another vote. But I thank God He gave all of us, the senators that stood up for this, and many, the opportunity to fight that important battle, because He opened our eyes to what is at stake and showed us what we needed to do to always defend religious liberty. Now, only a small fraction of attacks on religious liberty make headline news. We know the names Little Sisters of the Poor, Hobby Lobby, Chick-fil-A. Closer to home, we know about the state of Colorado's war on Jack Phillips and the Masterpiece Cake Shop, and the battle of Hercules Industry in Denver to practice their faith in their business. But hundreds more go unnoticed by the press. A February 2016 article in the Conservative Review discussed an annual report from the First Liberty Institute and the doubling of assaults on religious liberty. So from the article, First Liberty Institute claimed that hostility to religion in America is rising like floodwaters, as proven by the increased number of cases and attacks. documented in this report. This flood is engulfing ordinary citizens who simply try to live their normal lives according to their faith and conscience. In 2012, they cataloged over 600 instances where religious liberty was threatened or suppressed. By 2015, they identified 1,285 different attacks on religion in the United States. Those attacks doubled in less than 3 years, and they outlined 4 areas of concern. The public arena, or as we call the public square, of public places, government, and the workplace. The schoolhouse of education, from K-12 through higher academia. Another one, churches and ministries, in which one might expect hostility to be the least. And lastly, the military, which includes our service members, veterans, and their memorials. Some of the cases they included on their list listed a high school football coach suspended for praying after football games, a Marine court-martialed for refusing to take down a Bible verse, an Orthodox Jewish synagogue sued by the government for meeting in a private home, veterans prohibited from practicing their Native American rituals, faith rituals, at a VA center, cheerleaders stopped from writing Bible verses on their banners. As good citizens, if religious liberty is our original God-given right, we must ferociously defend it against the utilitarians and those anti-religious zealots who see it as an obstacle to their ends. So what is our role in the fight? The Bible tells us in the book of James that ye have not because ye ask not. Everything we do must begin with prayer. God also expects us to act, to speak up and stand for religious liberty, whether it's in sermons from the pulpit, in the public square, in our legislature, county, city, town councils, and even civic clubs and organizations. And we must support each other, particularly our religious liberty warriors, groups like the Becket Fund and Alliance Defending Freedom, who fight and win important court victories to protect our religious freedom and right of conscience. Friends, I'm looking at a lot of young faces out here. It's great to see. But we owe them a legacy. We owe them. Let us pledge in the sight of God today and each other to pray, to speak, to act, and to support each other. This is our path to protecting religious liberty and freedom, not only for our generation, but for the next generation. Thank you, and God bless.
At this time, I'd like to invite our next speaker to the podium, State Representative Kim Ransom. Representative Ransom will be responding to the call of the religious leaders to defend the pillar of the humanity of the unborn. Representative Ransom.
Thank you, Dr. Armington. When I was about 10 years old, I'm thinking I was maybe in 5th grade, we learned about World War II in the elementary school that I went to. Back in those days, we actually learned history, we learned facts, we learned dates, we learned what had happened during the war and what the Nazis had done to people. We learned about the concentration camps, we learned about the Holocaust. And we didn't learn it from a politically correct standpoint. Literally, our teacher just taught us what had happened there. So my child brain, I was around 9 or 10, I went home that night and asked, when my dad got home from work, I said, Dad, people were dying over there. Why didn't you do something? Why didn't you go get them out? Why didn't you do something? Well, if you do the math, my dad was middle school, maybe high school. For him to go to Europe, by himself and try to go rescue people from concentration camps might have been a little bit out of the ordinary, maybe a little bit impossible for him, but he was my hero. Think about all of you with your parents. Your dads are probably, at that age anyway, they're your hero. They're somebody you want to emulate. They're somebody you want to copy. And I thought my dad could go rescue, millions of people from concentration camps, and I was disappointed that he hadn't. But when I asked him, he had a response. He said, well, we didn't really know for sure what was going on. During the war, we heard rumors. We kind of knew something was happening. People were disappearing, but we weren't really sure. We weren't really sure what was happening or that people were being killed. And the media didn't help us. The media didn't tell us what was going on. The media hid the facts. All right, this was my dad telling me this at age 10. Please take those responses and apply them to what happens now in the abortion movement when we are talking about pro-life and saving babies. I remember when Roe versus Wade happened. Now, I was a kid. I didn't go from however old I was, middle school, and try to help immediately to start, breaking into doctors' offices and trying to rescue these babies that were being killed. But even then, you can tell where I'm going here. The passion was started. The candle was lit. People were dying out there. Babies were dying. People were dying. And we couldn't really see them. Back in 1973, when Roe versus Wade was passed, we didn't have the ultrasounds that they have now. We didn't have abilities to really see what was happening. They could kind of hear heartbeats, but we have so many better tools now to see that those babies are babies from the very beginning, from just the moment of conception, from so early on, before a mom even knows she's pregnant. There is a heartbeat that is, the heart is beating. There are brain waves that we can measure. There is a central nervous system. We know that a central nervous system is how we feel pain. That is how, if you cut your finger or step on a nail, it's your nervous system. It's through your spinal cord. That's how you feel pain. Therefore, if an infant at just a few weeks gestation has a central nervous system, they feel pain. We know that biologically. We know that from a scientific standpoint. Now, I'm pro-life because of my faith, because of my religion, because what I was taught growing up. One of my favorite verses from Jeremiah 1:5, before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. God knew us before we were even conceived. Thank you. God is sovereign. And when we understand that concept of sovereignty, there would not be a single baby started anytime, anywhere, without his fingerprints and plans for that child. If he's numbered the days of our lives and numbered the hairs on our heads, he knows us from before the moment we were conceived anyway. From the dawn of time, he was planning for us. Okay, so I can bring this from my viewpoint and my base, deep-set reasons for wanting to save the unborn, or I can bring into it the biological, the scientific backing. Now, I brought that passion as I grew up. Some of you know that I was a regular down at 20th and Vine. There are so many ways you can help save the unborn. Obviously, picketing, there are people that are trained in sidewalk counseling. We offered girls going into the clinic for abortion medical and financial help. Many of them took advantage of that, and I myself hosted at least a couple of baby showers for girls that had changed their mind, once these babies were born, we supplied, during the pregnancy, we supplied maternity clothes, baby clothes, car seats, playpens, you name it, and money. And we wanted to help these girls as they went through the pregnancy and as then they were trying to raise these children or choose adoption, whichever option they decided to go with. Either one is a fine option once that baby is started. But it's okay to come at it. There were people on that picket line, some of you know who they are, that weren't Christian, that really did not come at this from a biblical standpoint or from God telling them to do it, the calling that some of us have. They were there because of the biological scientific reasoning. We measure the end of life. When somebody is in the hospital or in an accident, the paramedics are there with their stethoscopes to listen to the heartbeat. In a hospital, if there's an operation that doesn't work, or if somebody is dying or just on their deathbed, they hook them up and they look for measurable brain waves. That flatlining that we've heard about, it's very sad when it happens. But if that's how we measure the end of life, why can't we measure the beginning of life? But when we measure those, why can't we recognize it? Now, I recognize it even earlier than that. From the dawn of time, God recognizes who we are going to be. But we as a society can easily recognize life when we can measure those items which happen before they will even do an abortion. When they do an abortion, they have to wait till the fetus is old enough to actually get all the parts out. And fetus is not a bad word. In Latin, it means young one or living one. When people try to say, oh, it's just a fetus, it's just a blob of tissue. A fetus is fine. A fetus is young one, it's living one. It's okay to use that term. And by the way, a blob of tissue does not have a heartbeat. Pregnancy matter will not have measurable brain waves. All right? We get that. Mothers are being lied to. That's the sad part. Mothers that do go into clinics or pregnancy centers and want to see their ultrasounds are being denied the ability to look at them. That's a very sad. They're also denied the long-term ramifications. They're not told that they might have physical issues that arise later with infertility or depression, becoming suicidal. There are many women that wake up years later and say, dear God, what did I do, when they finally have a child? Those of you that have had a child, that have been pregnant, know the joy when the nurse comes in and puts that Doppler on your growing belly and you hear that heartbeat and they're fast when they're very little and inside, but it's such a joyous feeling. Why should a young one that's inside a woman that may want to finish school or something like that, why would that child be able to be killed, whereas somebody that desperately wanted a baby that has the same heartbeat and they're both 6 weeks pregnant, why would that child be any different? And I'll answer that question. It's not. It's not. It's still a baby. And I want to thank everybody here. I know Senator Lundberg mentioned the pastors that are here. Those of you that sent notes of appreciation through Aaron, I want to thank you for those. When Aaron would send me a text that, a certain pastor has sent a note of appreciation, I would eagerly run to my email and look at those. We really do get beat up in this building behind us when we run pro-life bills. They are not welcomed. I sometimes joke about the bruises that I've had after some of the bills I've run. But that doesn't mean I'm going to stop. I will never give up because people are dying out there. Babies are dying. But I want to thank you for your prayers when I know that people like you are praying for us, not just in committee, not just when bills are being drafted and worked on, but I know that you are there behind the scenes as we're even planning bills and trying to get co-sponsors and all of the tasks that go into running legislation. Those of you that look at other ways to help the unborn, I thank you for those. If you're working at the clinics, if you're working at a pregnancy center, partner. If you're in the legal field trying to help justify some of what's going on a national or a state level, I thank you for that too. Never, never, never give up. People are dying out there. Babies are dying out there. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Ransom, for such an awesome job, as well so as our other speakers that have come before us today. Before we move forward, I would like for all clergy to please stand. All clergy. Amen. Give our clergy a round of applause, please. Amen. You may be seated. I almost thought I was in church. At this time, we are going to announce the recipients of the Patriot League's 2016 Friend of Motherhood Awards. The awards, as well as the legislator designation of Pillar Defender, do not constitute a political endorsement. However, the award does constitute an appropriate and deserving recognition that these individuals are committed to the defense of all of the Pillar principles. Recipient selection included input from the award recipients' legislative peers and eligible candidates or current members of the Colorado House or Senate who didn't receive the award at the immediate previous event. 2 recipients were selected from the House chamber, and 2 recipients were selected from the Senate chamber. The Friend of Motherhood Award gives voice to the essential role that mothers play in society and illuminates how the Pillar principles uphold and are interwoven in the role of motherhood. It reads, "We wish to express our gratitude for your defense of the humanity of the unborn. As mothers, this is not a political issue, but a reality that each of us has experienced firsthand. We're also grateful for your defense of traditional marriage as the context where a child's mother and father can provide them with the greatest chance for success in life. Finally, we thank you for defending the fundamental right of fit parents to determine what is best for their children, and for defending our religious liberties to live according to conscience as protected by our U.S. Constitution and given to us by God Himself. Signed by Colorado mothers and presented on this day, Saturday, September the 24th, 2016. With that, I'd like to invite one of our 4 Colorado mothers who is here to help us today, Mrs. Freeman, to join me at the podium so that I can announce the first recipient, who we'll ask to come to the podium to receive their award and from Mrs. Freeman. Okay. The first recipient for this year's Friend of Motherhood Award calls Commerce City home and represents House District Number 30. Colorado State Representative Joanne Windhouse, congratulations. Yes. You may be. Yes. Mrs. Tellis, would you please join me at the podium for the announcement of the next recipient? Okay, the next recipient of this year's Friend of Motherhood Award calls Avada home and represents Senate District Number 19, Colorado State Senator Laura Woods. Congratulations. Mrs. Montaya, Would you please join me at the podium for the announcement of the next recipient? Okay, the next recipient of this year's Friend of Motherhood Award calls Parker home and represents Senate District Number 30, Colorado State Senator Chris Hobart. Congratulations. Mrs. Dunn, would you please join me at the podium for the announcement of the final recipient? The final recipient of this year's Friend of Motherhood Award calls Castle Rock home and represents House District Number 45, Colorado State Representative Patrick Neville. Congratulations. Please join me in giving one last round of applause for the recipients of the 2016 Friend of Motherhood Awards. Also, we want to give our young people a round of applause for being here today. Now give yourself a round of applause. The Patriot League would like to take a moment and recognize a few folks as well as to express our appreciation for all the speakers who shared with us today. First, as a group, our appreciation goes out to our Pillar Project participants, the religious leaders who have made all of this possible by committing to stand together for the pillars. It is heartening to see leading members of our society with the courage to stand by their principles, even when these principles may have fallen out of popularity with certain elements of the culture. We'd like to extend a special thanks to Randy and Jody, whose tremendous hard work, sacrifice, and commitment have been instrumental in making this day possible. We'd also like to thank others who have provided important support and friendship, including Andrew and Danielle, Brian and Kimberly, Jack and Vicky, Myron and Gloria, as well as the members of our advisory board. Abdul Rahim Ali, John Nonnerly, and John Paul Labar. We do want to encourage each of you to contact us at www.pillowproject.com. That's www.pillowproject.com to learn how you can get involved in this effort to defend the Pillar principles. There's a sign-up sheet at the registration table for this purpose, as well as for religious leaders who are present today who might be interested in becoming participants. Each year, we end our event with some important historical quotes, one of which is a quote from a German pastor in 1945, who confessed that he and other religious leaders had failed to adequately stand up to the oppressive government of Nazi Germany in what is known as Stuttgart Declaration of Guilt. Martin Niemöller said, "Through us, infinite wrong was brought over many peoples and country. That which we often testified to in our communities, we express now in the name of the whole church. We did fight for long years in the name of Jesus Christ against the mentality that found its awful expression in the National Socialist regime of violence, but we accuse ourselves for not standing to our benefits more courageously, for not praying more faithfully, for not believing more joyously, and for not loving more ardently. I'll conclude our time with a quote from the first President of the United States of America, the father of our country, George Washington, who said, "Of all the dispositions and habits which lead to political prosperity, religion and morality are indispensable supports. In vain would that man claim the tribute of patriotism who should labor to subvert these great pillars of human happiness." Once again, I want to thank you for allowing me to serve as your MC all the way from the great state of Louisiana in the city of Shreveport. We thank you for being here. Have a wonderful rest of the day, and God bless you. God bless America. You are dismissed.